I don't know. The future. The future. I hate to say this. I see now in my travels. I see more of the haves and have-nots in the fire service. In other words, I see fire departments that are prospering. I mean, they're just doing. They're moving on. Then you see other fire departments that are just stuck. And you wish that there was a way you could kind of equalize that, because, I mean, it's really troubling sometimes. Well, once again, this is a recurring kind of a comment from me. It has to do with boss behaviors. What are the leaders and officers and managers and grand poobahs in that system? Sometimes it's as simple as how are they simply treating the workers. It's probably as critical as anything else. How are the bosses treating the workers? The data now is becoming more and more compelling that the most effective bosses are the bosses, and this is the way they're saying it. Social scientists are saying it this way. They say the most effective bosses are the nicest ones. Not complicated. In other words, who will reflect a set of discernible behaviors, kindness, consideration, patience, so on, that will connect those behaviors, their behaviors, with the workers. Exactly the same routine that we hear, see, feel, touch, hear, get feedback on between the workers and the customers. I worked in the 5th largest city in the country my whole career. We heard from customers that said, I received service from your department. I felt that I was back in the little town in Nebraska that I was raised in. Yes. That's when you hit a home run. It's because that's the way that those workers treated those customers. So again, when you see it, when it happens, it's not real complicated, but it's powerful when you look at what those people remember. And you say it, we've said it in here this afternoon, is how long will that family remember that? Well, they remember it forever. Now, you will remember 100% of the feelings that you've had. Remember about half of what you hear, a little bit less of what you read. You remember 100% of the way you feel. Well, we need to become, again, literate, effective, patient, understanding simply about that. In other words, to say that we have a chance in our service to connect to people it's an exceptional relationship that we have. And I don't mean to go off on something that's spooky in the thing at all, but really, when you sort of think about the American Fire Service today, is that we're the Peace Corps with a tank of water. I mean, you have a chance to simply make a profound difference in people's lives by the way you treat them. A difference that they will remember forever. And I mean, I think that's what we've learned in this customer stuff. This is the added value stuff. Is you change that woman's tire in the rain and then notice how long she remembers that and how much she'll tell you that story like it happened last Tuesday and it happened 22 years ago. I mean, it's really interesting when you hook up to that. And I guess we lose track of that is how powerful our service can be in the lives of the people, not only the lives of the people inside the service, which is something that is a terrific history and tradition of our service, but also more and more in the things that we're able to do on the outside. Now imagine if we can make sense just simply out of empowerment, what we've said here today. In other words, that we can create a relationship, but then a system and an outcome that does what empowerment can do. And we do that effectively. So you look at an organization that has done that, and there's not very many of them if you study customer service. A lot of them will talk about empowerment, but when you get down to it, when you really get into the task level, they'll say that's a lot of, they talk about it, but if you really get into it, it isn't the way they talk about it. But if you see a group of people, and I watched a group of firefighters look just like your firefighters, who were authentically and sensibly empowered. And it was something to read those letters from people. And if you'd think, well, here's this crazy old guy that wears these goofy shirts out there blabbing about empowerment again. And that, he comes from this wild-eyed system out there in the middle of nowhere. If I was going to criticize firefighters, Phoenix firefighters, I don't mean to go anywhere else. And I didn't criticize Phoenix firefighters very much, honestly, because they didn't deserve it. But if I was going to criticize them in empowerment, this is going to sound odd, what I would criticize them in is that they were too damn conservative. I wish they had done things that were more, not bold, but that they actually extended the ability that they had to do extra things for people, even more than they did. And they did a lot, too. So, I mean, I say that with a happy heart. But, you'd think, well, you got a bunch of energetic, mischievous firefighters, and they're empowered. So they're all going to go nuts. See, I don't think that's not the case. You really get into firefighters, they're pretty conservative, they're very thoughtful, they are very, very connected to approval. They don't want to disappoint their boss. It's the most effective. It creates the most effective level of self-discipline that you could imagine in a workforce. So you start thinking, well, if we can break this loose, and I don't mean that it was subdued so much, but that if we could take advantage of this, you think of the things that a workforce can do. And again, I saw a lot of it there, and I'm sure it's still going on. I just have been retired for a couple of years. Amazing stuff when you saw it. And you saw the effect of it inside the organization in the sense of the satisfaction that firefighters and workers had when they were able to do this. And simply, we feel very, very good and very positive and very fulfilled when we help people. That isn't very complicated. Helping people makes us feel good, which is a terrific connection. In other words, it's a terrific circuit when you think about it. Plus, we never know who we're helping. Not that it makes any difference who we're helping. But you probably are not going to have a fire in your house, but you will connect to the 10% of the population in some way, directly or indirectly, will connect to our EMS system. So in 10 years, everybody in the community has some experience with the fire department in EMS, if you look at it. I think it's more than that from what I've seen. When I just think of my family, and I got 3 kids and 7 grandkids and all the other catastrophe that goes with it, blissfully, is we have connected to the EMS system a lot more than that. It wouldn't take our family 10 years to directly or indirectly get connected to it. So there, you're making an impact, and you're somehow making contact with virtually everybody in the community every 8 or 10 years. Well, you start thinking about that and the opportunity that has and the exposure and the connection and so on. It's pretty profound. So. Any more questions? Can we ask them questions? You're the 3rd engine to a 6-unit strip zone? No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. What do we miss, you all? Hop in. Questions, comments, emotional outbursts? See, I guess a big deal that when we start looking at this is that we start talking about, and this was kind of an interesting little project in this whole program, is we start saying, what is the best possible service? In other words, that's kind of what the business thing is. In other words, we're looking at the best possible service. Well, when you start laying it out, and you start kind of, let me say, taking it apart, and I mean that in a positive way, start seeing that that there's sort of 2 things that are going on, and we've talked about it here already today. One of it is that our tactical, technical, internal professional, whatever you want to call it, part of that call is something that the customer depends on us to have that system in place. In other words, Mrs. Smith has paid her taxes her whole life. She's driven by her fire station, as she calls it. The lights are on, somebody's home. She sees us in the community. She's shopping in the grocery store. She sees her crew and she visits with them. She may know a firefighter or be related to one. So she depends on us to have that service in place when she needs it. Just I'm repeating myself. So that's a big deal. In other words, not to take anything away from that. And that is more, let me call it the core service kind of thing. But when you look at the experience that she's having, and this goes back to reading that whole letter, is that she also has her own, and she brings her own perception, experience, personal profile. She personalizes, obviously, what's going on. So the best possible service to her is not technical, it's not abstract, it's not scientific, it's very personal, it's very emotional, and so on. So for us, I guess, part of the challenge is to not give up anything in the sense of us looking at the way that we deliver that service, obviously always trying to do it better and looking for the improvements and so on, and coming to the Missouri Fire School like we do. In other words, that's why we do this. But for us to kind of get up and walk around and sort of look at this whole thing from her position. And that's a technique or an approach that works a lot of different ways. In other words, the question about how does a young officer deal with an older worker? Well, get up and walk around and look at that situation in the eyes, let me say, of that older worker. You got a young person coming in that doesn't have a lot of tactical experience. Kind of imagine the kinds of things that person is wondering about. So if we can somehow say to ourselves, I'm going to try to package this up in a way that helps that person in their context, not in mine. And there's a set of things that I understand just as second nature because I've done it for the last gazillion years that are brand new to him. Now, I can either make a judgment about him and say, damn kids don't know none of this stuff, don't know a crescent wrench from a pair of channel locks. Well, nobody ever showed them a crescent wrench and a pair of channel locks. Once we do, they can do anything with them we can. Now, they can show us a set of things that we can't even imagine. I mean, I can't put numbers in my cell phone. And then it really gets complicated for me. So I am continually handing something to somebody to do something with in the process. But if we can sort of put those two things together when you think about it, in other words, to say that, and we do it in the customer thing because it kind of lends itself to what we're talking about here, is I look at it technically, she looks at it emotionally. If I can understand that, and she probably isn't going to understand my technical part. She admires it, she respects it, she called me for it, she depends on it. But I'm not going to make a fire protection engineer out of Mrs. Smith just because she had a fire in her kitchen. But I can figure out people, pets, pictures, and pills if I want to. And that's a pretty straightforward kind of a thing, really, for me. So the challenge in it is, can I somehow get up and walk around and look in that again? And if it calls on us, I think, to develop kind of I don't mean to say it, maybe it is a little bit different set of skills. This whole customer thing does. Because it moves us away from what we do sometimes. People like us, like action-oriented technical people, is we have the inclination to, if it doesn't work, we do the wrong thing harder. Instead of standing back and saying, it's like if somebody doesn't understand us, what we start doing is we do a set of things so they really don't understand us. I mean, you guys are married, you understand that. I can relate to that. So, but the whole notion is saying, what is the best possible service? And I used to think that hell, I knew what the best possible service was, and nobody had a better perception of that than I did. Well, after a while, you figure out there's almost as many different definitions of best possible service as there are people defining it. And that I, at least, and I don't think I'm going to be any different than anybody else, I could learn an awful lot about best possible service if I would just shut up and listen in the process. So that becomes a whole part of this thing. Again, we start saying, what's going on in the future? We're trying to predict the future. And we're saying, well, one of the ways that we ought to be predicting the future is listening and watching and paying attention and genuinely getting into other people's perceptions to say, this is where these folks are positioned. Now, clearly, they will always call on us to do a technical, tactical kind of a thing. But even there, they depend on us to add value. We did not get very much input from customers saying, you ought to think about adding this piece to the system. That's what they do. In other words, that's what the organization has to do. If you're in the business of selling sirens, you got to figure out how to add value. Really. You wished it was the other way around. In other words, I wish I could get feedback, and then I'd listen to that feedback, and I'd somehow figure that out from the feedback. But it's challenging to get feedback. If you look at people that evaluate effectiveness in a broad way, they will tell you how challenging it is to get information about that, so that they can just simply create those improvements in the process. Yeah. Yeah, hand the mic there to that man.
Chief, in the pursuit of added value in the fire service, what limit is there to, do you think, in using good judgment, to doing public service programs such as public ed, fundraising for things like MDA, and whose role is it to do those kind of programs? If you understand my question.
I think that, well, let me start with, I think with added value, with public education, is that I was present when we developed a lot of the public education stuff in the fire service. We were kind of actively involved in that. And when I was a young assistant chief, this is years ago, I went out and hired a school teacher who worked for us for 30 years to do public education. She had a master's degree in elementary education, so she knew how to deal with little kids. I watched that process where we changed people's attitudes and behaviors with education. In other words, that we had to get into their space and into their personalities almost. In other words, their identities. If they were little kids, we had to deal with them on their level. You had to have firefighters, and you all do it. You had to sit on the floor to communicate with them, didn't you? You do that too. In other words, you don't look down on little kids. It's a simple little thing, but it was interesting to watch that and to see the effect in the community. I come from the drowning capital of the world. The number one cause of death for children under 4 years old in Arizona is drowning. And we had a process once where we took a stage like this, and there was a line of kids that were 4 years old sitting in little chairs. It was a Kenilworth school, and we said, these are the kids in this community that we're going to drown if we don't do something about it. And we turned that town upside down with drowning education and reduced the number of kids that drowned by almost 80%. I mean, it was a most amazing community program. But you saw how powerful that public education was. That if you will create opportunities for people to understand, that's obviously what education does for us, so that they can, in other words, it changes not only their attitude, but then it changes their behavior. In other words, it creates behavioral changes. And we do that with education. It's huge customer connection. No, I think that's enormous. I think more and more in the future, to answer the question about what's cooking in the next 4 or 5 years. Has to have more educational connection that we extend to Mrs. Smith and the Smith family. Let me keep talking about them. I think things like MDA, and I watched that in my own fire department, was a very positive, very widespread program when we did that. It was all managed inside the system, the union. It was a union program, but we cooperated with it. We had a great relationship with the union. And hell, it seemed like when they did that, they were virtually on every street corner in town. They collected, I don't forget what it was, they collected an enormous amount of money. Honestly, never got any negative response to MDA, to firefighters and boots and all that stuff, you know. I think the firefighters felt very positively about it. I was honestly, just to answer your question there, I was very, very supportive of it. I thought it was a great program, honestly. But I think that whole thing, I think the whole notion of connecting in the community and being visible in the community and being present, in other words, where people are confident because they see firefighters, where we teach firefighters a set of social skills. In other words, we help them to say that he not only is technically capable and educationally adept, but he's also socially adept. He's emotionally literate. When he's fit for duty, we say he's biologically fit and he's cognitively fit, but then he's socially fit and he's emotionally fit to go out and help the Smith family. And we help him understand that. I think that's a huge part of what we're doing. And to say that when you're shopping in the grocery store, as an example, that's an opportunity that you have to connect to 150 people in a busy grocery store? We had grocery stores that would call us and say, "Where are our firefighters?" Said, "I don't know." Call them. I don't know. I'm hungry. I'm going to go eat. No, I mean, so it was interesting to see. My daughter is a battalion chief. I mentioned that. As a firefighter, been on the job almost 20 years. She said, you would go shopping. She said she would go shopping in a grocery store, and she said if she was in that store 5 minutes, she had 4 little girls hanging on to her. It was so positive for those kids to see a little girl see a woman who was a firefighter. She said it was the most amazing experience. And she says sometimes they would actually leave me at the grocery store with these little girls. They were having a pep rally. I mean, so you see how profound the presence of firefighters can be, isn't it? I mean, you look at public education. I mean, you'll talk to people now that are adults, people in this room. We remember things that firefighters did when we were little kids. And we were in school programs and different kinds of things. A lot of firefighters say, I'm a firefighter because firefighter Smith came to this school and did something for us and with us and at us. I mean, I think it's an enormous part of what we do. Is you can't lock yourself up in a fire station anymore and just say, hey, I'm waiting. You know, you're part of that. You're part of that community. You have to be part of that community. It goes back to the business of haves and have-nots. And I don't mean to say it that way in such an abrupt way, but you look at the haves, and I mean they're every place. They're in everything. They're connected. They know the community, and they're not trying to be all things to all people. What they are is they're representing the service that we deliver. To say that if you need us, we're here, and here's how you relate to us, and here's what we're about, and so on. I mean, I don't know. I think the public education, the whole notion of changing people's, to providing inputs to them that cause us to behave different. Health today, big deal with health. Is I think that's another thing in the future. Is if you look at fire prevention, look at EMS, the EMS connection in a community. The epidemic of type 2 diabetes, if you look at that and you extend it out, it will absolutely, the people who study it say, if we can't somehow stabilize that, it will absolutely debilitate our EMS system. We do not have the resources to provide service to the type 2 diabetic community. So what's the answer to it? Well, the smart money says it's prevention. Well, I don't know. Are we ready for that? Are we ready to become sort of preventative health specialists and models and so on? I don't know. But, you know, we have fire prevention. 80% of what we do is EMS. Fire prevention is a huge thing, too. I mean, I don't mean that in any way to diminish it, but, you know, I don't know. You got, in your career, you'll do EMS prevention. And don't you forget it. Just kidding.
Chief, since I have the mic still.
I'm sorry?
Since I still have the mic back here.
Sure, no, keep going. You're doing
another
good.
thing I wondered, you brought up customer service within the organization internally. Do you think you could illustrate a little more about that?
Internal customer service?
I suppose with regards to employees and their relationship within the organization, I would guess, but could you talk a little more about that?
Sure. Oops. A big deal, too, is, well, it goes back to the food chain. Let me do that food chain thing. Is you got this routine where you have, you got the customer, you got the worker, you got the boss. Well, it's a food chain. And the way the food chain goes is it goes from the boss to the worker to the customer. So whatever the boss wants to achieve with the customer, in the sense of how the worker is treating the customer, the boss is going to have to provide for the worker. And you can almost, and I found myself, and I find myself, connecting that continually. Let me give you an example of this, and this is an emotional one for us, is uniforms. A lot of stuff out there on fire department uniforms. We were, because of where we live, a fire department, we live in a place, we live in the most arid, the hottest, most arid, driest place in the country. If you live in Phoenix, Arizona, in the middle of August, and you die and go to hell, they give you a blanket. That's how hot it is there. So we had adopted tropical kind of uniforms, if you may, desert uniforms, which basically are simple. They're postman shorts and T-shirts. It's not complicated. If you go to an EMS call, you wear brush pants. If you go to a fire call, you wear turnout pants. But if you're not on a call, you can wear shorts because it's, and people say a lot of different feelings about shorts. I was in the fire department talking about incident command the other day, and we talked about shorts for an hour. Yeah. And you got all this stuff. It doesn't look professional. It looks this way. It looks that way, and so on. But people say, "Why do you let your firefighters wear shorts?" I said, "Because they're comfortable in shorts." They said, "Well, why are you concerned about whether they're comfortable?" I said, "Because they're very smart, and I've asked them if they would do everything they could to make Mrs. Smith comfortable." Does that make sense? Should firefighters make the customers comfortable if they can? Yeah. How do I get that to be an authentic message inside the organization? Do the same thing for them, absolutely. Do anything and everything that I can do that's sensible and reasonable and honest and so on to make the firefighters comfortable. And then I want the customers to trust the firefighters. What should I do? I should trust the firefighters. Yeah. If I trust the firefighters, how will they act? I studied it. How?
I was going to say listen to them, study them.
Yeah, they'll act trustworthy. I want the customers to like the firefighters. What should I do?
Like the firefighters.
I should like the firefighters. The inside creates the outside. It's not very complicated. I need to be what I want them to be. That's the old Gandhi thing. So there's the internal part driving the external part, isn't it? So whatever I want the firefighters to add value to the customers. What should I do?
Add value to the firefighters.
Which means I ought to do some things for the firefighters that no one makes me do. And I don't mean it in some self-grandizing, phony, baloney kind of way. In other words, if there is something that I can do that makes the firefighter's life safer, more pleasant, happier, cause them to have a better time, whatever, I ought to do that. And I shouldn't behave in a way that the only way I'll do that is if you make me do it. That we negotiate it, that I get something for it. Now, it sounds kind of funny. It sounds kind of goofy when you say that. But if you watch that, and see, it changes the whole dynamic in the workplace when I tell the firefighters, be nice. I was a construction worker before I became a firefighter. I never had a boss tell me to be nice. I had great bosses, but they said, pick it up over there, take it over there. I was a hod carrier. We picked things up and we took it. So what we did. We were little forklifts in those days. It was before they had forklifts. But when you say, in the workplace, when that boss says, be nice, you change that workplace. Because now you create a different ethic, a different value, a different evaluation on what you do as the boss. In other words, I can't tell you to be nice and then I'm a jerk because you're too damn smart. You say that doesn't make any sense. You tell me to do this over here and you do this over here. And you go tilt. So it's an interesting process when you start looking at the internal customer process connected to the external one. And really, in a way, it isn't any more complicated than that. Is it that if I want her comfortable, I have to put my money where my mouth is, really and truly, in that process to say, okay, I'll let you be comfortable too. Now, clearly, I don't want them wearing chicken suits. And I want them wearing uniforms that are uniform and they're well maintained. And we had a hair regulation that your hair had to be a color that occurs naturally in humans. You know, you couldn't show up a purple hair. But honestly, we didn't have a lot of rules. We had all our rules of conduct and behavior on one sheet of paper. I found firefighters didn't need a whole lot of rules to get along. We didn't have them, and so on. Tried to make it as simple and positive that we could for people to come to work. Tried to make it as happy a place as we could make it. Now, do firefighters do some enormously sad things? Absolutely. You guys see the most horrible things that you could send a worker out to deal with. Well, the challenge ought to be that you go out there and you deal with that and you deliver standard service and you do that better than any workforce on this planet. The challenge should not be coming to work. The challenge shouldn't be in the fire station. The occupational challenge ought to be when you're delivering service. And I know there's problems in the workplace and you got to work hard and everything doesn't work out perfect. And I don't mean to make it sound like where I was perfect, because it wasn't. But honestly, we worked hard on trying to say that the inside of this system ought to really reflect what we expect to go on the outside. And I'm going to shut up and let this man say something.
Well, I think you're putting some novel ideas out there. I'm being sarcastic on that. But,
no.
I really wish there were some more chief officers in this class. Hopefully there's a lot watching out there. But how, as a firefighter, how do you go about changing that state of mind with chief officers or fire chiefs? I think you're kind of stuck in the middle there being a firefighter, and it's hard to change from the bottom up, the mindset.
I think the first thing that we all do, and the guy said, do what you can where you are with what you got. That's all you can do. In a way, it's kind of simplistic, but really it's kind of true. I think that workers can help bosses a lot. I think that if workers will legitimately represent the task level of the system, and they do that in a mature kind of way. In other words, that they pick the time and the place where they do it, and they do it in a respectful way. And I don't mean that in some overly obedient way at all, even. If they will do completed staff work, in other words, with bosses, the trick with a lot of bosses is that you want them to only have to say yes, because you've done everything else. And we call that completed staff work. That's a big deal, too. I think for workers and all of us, because we're all workers. Hell, I was a fire chief. Well, hell, I worked for a deputy city manager. I mean, I was just as much a worker as anybody in the system. Is you got to be tough, and you got to be a grown-up. Is you win some and you lose some. And when you win, don't win too big, and don't be arrogant about it. When you lose, sometimes you got to kind of go and hide out for a day or two. And I mean that in a positive kind of way. I think a lot of it is just being grown up, is to say, and once in a while you'll get a little bit of road rash, and hell, you get over that in the process. You're not always going to get your way. I think that, but you see people, and I saw them continually when I was a fire chief damn near 30 years. We had firefighters in that system that were incredible leaders. Guys on the bottom, kids that are, hell, you had recruit classes that took on projects in the system. And you'd see how much of an impact they could have. So I guess, I don't know, you pay attention, you work hard, you try to be, again, a grown-up, and you say, once in a while I'll get one through, once in a while I'll get it kind of bounced on me, and you just keep going, keep on keeping on. Don't get bitter over things. You see that, I mentioned that before. You got people who quit and stay, all that junk. It just wrecks the system, Sometimes you got to just, I guess all the time, you got to be patient. Patience is a huge thing. It's hard for us. We're not patient people, or we wouldn't be in this job. I mean, we want immediate. I mean, when they ring the bell, we start salivating. Man, we want to go put water on it, and that's a big deal. And I'm glad we're that way. I wouldn't want to try to manage a bunch of timid firefighters. Ooh. But because everybody is someplace in the system. There's a profound statement. So you're in the, even if you're at the top of one part of the system, you're in the middle of the rest of the system. So you've got the same challenges in the process. I was there a long time. My bosses, I think most of my bosses thought I was crazy, really and truly. They said it doesn't make any difference what we say. He's going to do it anyway, somehow. I mean, we were kind of an enthusiastic group of wackos there for a long time. I think did some really neat stuff for us, Some of it worked, some of it didn't, some of it was stupid, but hell, you didn't know it was until you did it, So we'd try about anything, we wouldn't, hopefully not things that were dangerous, but so, and that was fun too. I think a lot of it is fun for bosses, is we got to try to make work interesting and fun if we can. Firefighters respond to interesting and fun too. I mean, hell, firefighters can entertain themselves in a stuck elevator. So incredible workforce. I've never seen anything that firefighters couldn't do. Most trainable group of people, and a lot of other folks out inside and outside the service say that. They say it's the most trainable group of people on the planet. Probably the easiest group of people to train when you look at really kind of sometimes really complicated training kinds of things. They say we've never seen people catch on like these characters do. So got a terrific set of assets in the fire service. I guess and part of it when we look in the future is to say how do we keep taking advantage of that? And I mean take advantage in a positive, constructive, kind of not a self-serving kind of way, but that's a big deal too. Yeah, hop in.
Kind of expand on, you were talking about how can we change chief officers and those above us. Observation on my part, what I've found is that if you show them by small examples, it's the small steps to get to the big steps, and also kind of point out to them that those times we drive by Mrs. Smith when she's stuck with a flat tire in the rain, she'll remember that fire truck driving by and not helping her out. And as time progresses, whether it's a good experience, bad experience, facts become fuzzy. And if we've given them a good experience, a lot of times those stories maintain a good positive spin in the future. Just as the converse of it, those bad negative stories take on a little bit more ragged edge, and it comes back to bite us in the butt later on. So if you can point out to the chief officers by example, again, small steps build to the little bit larger and larger, and try to get them to buy into it. And like you say, if anytime you can get a manager to think that was the greatest idea I ever had, thank you. Something along those lines, just let them take the glory for it and run with it.
Our city manager said once that Brunacini lets the air out of Mrs. Smith's tire so he can change her tire. I said, you caught me again. Yeah, you're right. It's a lot of little stuff, a lot of times, isn't it? Take your thing. A lot of public education stuff is, it's little contacts and little connections. Big outcomes, though.
Chief, just to make a kind of a different direction,
Sure.
is there any pitfalls or any negative effects of customer service? We talk about the positive, but is there any kind of negative that you've come across in your experiences over the years? Something that maybe you thought was good and you implemented it, and it turned out to be, not such a good idea, and it maybe hurt your department. If maybe somebody else in the department is, somebody else's department is doing it.
Well, that's a good question. Honestly, I can't think of anything. Trying to think of something that hurt. And honestly, I don't think I think sometimes, and this was a problem that I had, and let me just talk about it for a second, is I think sometimes I went too fast. And I wasn't smart enough to size up the recipients well enough. And that some of the people were able to go that fast, but a lot of others weren't. And I don't think that in a program like customer service that we ought to go at the speed of the slowest. But we probably ought to go more at the speed of the middle. Because there's some people who get it, and they get it right now, and they'll march off, and I mean they'll kick a field goal the first time they get the ball, I think. Other people, they're not used to it. Is that if you've worn very formal dress uniforms and you want to make firefighters comfortable, so one day you put them all in pith helmets and jock straps, the general public in that fire department is not ready for that. So some of this stuff is like empowerment. I think it's better to go sometimes to go at least a little bit slower, and in my case probably a lot slower. So I think that's more of a leadership thing or a boss behavior, really. I don't think the problem with the troops so much is just that I would appeal, because I knew who the accelerated class was. So what I did is I played to the accelerated class, and I scared the tar out of the people who were maybe a little bit slower than that. And I don't mean that in intelligence, just in being able to kind of get their mind around it. So there, I think that's sort of a problem, not only just in customer service, but in change in general, is being able to size that group up and saying, okay, here's how fast we can move this. Is a big deal, But I don't know, in customer service, I think for us, we evolved in a way that we did things that were sort of safe and accepted, and people were comfortable with them, and we kind of moved more incrementally in sort of the general customer service stuff, I guess I'd say, yeah. But yeah.
Real quick, I'm sure in all the experience you've had, you have one call, one contact that really sticks out with you with somebody who is just really rude or just generally a pain. I'm sure you've had at least one call like that where someone's just telling you to do something, do this, do that. I don't care what you have to do, but you do what I tell you to do. And how do you deal with a customer like that? How do you deal with somebody who has no respect for your position but wants you to do it their way right now?
Well, it's the the technique of dealing with difficult people is sort of the general category that's in. And I've only had maybe 10 or 12,000 of those people in my life. See, I'll tell you the problem with those people is that it becomes the challenge to be nice. Because what you'd really like to do is sink a pick-headed axe right in their forehead, not be nice to them. I think most of them will be. You can win them over if you will be nice to them in the process. Because if you listen to them, if you explain things to them. Sometimes if you watch people who are really skillful in dealing with difficult people, they're really good at explaining what they can do and what they can't do. In other words, they're very straightforward about that. But there's a whole set of techniques that are taught about how to deal in that situation. I guess mostly in my career, in a way, let me say, I was kind of insulated from those people, to be honest about it. But you would see that in the street. I mean, you know, because you're out watching and hanging out and so on. But I watched firefighters deal with people like that, and I marveled that they were able to do what they did. I mean, just in the sense of being patient and mature and kind and so on to them. But it's a challenge. It is, isn't it? I mean, it's a, you know, now you can't let workers get hurt. And we would say that, saying if you want to be difficult, that's one thing. But when you put your hand on that worker, it's a different deal. And when you do that, that's a different process. And you're going to spend the night in jail. I mean, and that was a standing thing with us. If you threatened a firefighter, we would pursue that to the end of that process. We didn't take advantage of it. Sometimes I think the firefighters almost sheltered people from that because we were more concerned about their welfare sometimes than they were. But if we saw somebody who was in any way a threat to a firefighter, we're pretty straightforward about it. You can't put your hands on the help, I guess. But that didn't happen very often. Most people would. But honestly, most people we dealt with, you deal with, are really pretty nice, aren't they? I mean, it's unusual to have somebody. It really is unusual. So sometimes it's hard to deal with because it is so unusual. But how would you like to be the baggage clerk for United Airlines at O'Hare Airport? Everyone you deal with, you lost their luggage. And they're really happy with you. And you didn't have a damn thing to do with losing their luggage. That's just what your job is, you know. So, I mean, there's people who deal with that every day. So there's probably folks that we could learn a lot from if we really went and visited with, you know.
Chief, I got a question. Said, how do you deal with public perception of driving issues? How would you deal with those driving issues? Basically, the complaint from the outside was, why do your trucks drive so fast? Why do your people have to drive so fast?
Well, I agreed with them. And this is just a wing of the nut house that I was in, is that I had, in almost my whole career as a fire officer, I struggled in my own fire department to get that fire department to slow down and to stop. And I mean slow down generally because we drive fire apparatus too damn fast as a general observation. And that if we want to eliminate the majority of our accidents, we need to stop at negative right-of-way situations. Red lights, stop signs, any place we can't see, come to a full, complete stop. I struggled for my whole career with that. And I think the perception of the public is valid when they say you're driving too damn fast. And I think bosses ought to enforce standard driving rules. I'm a nutcase on driving. And we had 10 over the speed limit as a speed limit. We had, if you're on the other side of the double yellow going into an intersection, 15 miles an hour, come to a complete stop regardless of the disposition of the traffic signal. I mean, we had the whole process, and we beat people over the head. In my experience there for 35 years trying to get firefighters to, and firefighters now, I mean, it worked. Firefighters now, I think, drive a lot different. When I was a young firefighter, it looked like a thrill show. It was stupid. I mean, it was absolutely suicidal. We go a lot of places. I go a lot of places around the country, and I see fire apparatus. Most of it is driven too fast, and most of it doesn't stop where it ought to, as a routine. So when Mrs. Smith is scared, you scared the customers. Don't scare the customers. It's all about bosses. Well, bosses enforce those driving regulations. And for us, we're all former driving violators. Every boss in the fire service, I'm overstating this maybe, used to break driving rules. So now what I am, now I'm a battalion chief and I got to tell you to slow down and stop. You say, well, shit, chief, I can remember when you used to drive like, whatever. Say, well, that was then, this is now. Now slow down and stop. Sorry. It didn't work. And you got to just keep hammering them, I guess. We are anxious to get where we're going. But you have a fatal wreck with a fire truck, and you wish that you had driven that truck a different way. And I say that having lived through that a half a dozen times, not with a firefighter, but with a customer. So you T-bone the Catholic Family of the Year in their Plymouth Voyager, and you see what happens in that community. I mean, that's a horrible insult to a Plymouth Voyager. We drive the largest, heaviest fire vehicles on the road. So if we want to be bullies, drive nice. Drive slower than faster. Stop quicker than delayed, and so on. The whole routine. I probably did something when I was the fire chief affirmative for driving. There was a period where I probably did something once a week. Stop a truck, have a truck come to my office. I mean, I'm going home and I see a fire truck doing something stupid. I call the shift commander over the tactical channel and say, have engine 4 break from that call, go to their station, get their driving regulations, and meet me in my office. I did that over the TAC channel. So who's listening to it? Everybody. And it was just street theater. And I mean, you kind of hit a sore spot with me with driving. Yeah. So in there, well, what do we lose? 20% of the firefighters responding to and returning from? 100% preventable, basically. 100% preventable accident. Big deal, though. You can create a lot of mayhem with a fire truck. I mean, you start running into, you all see it all the time. Not with fire trucks, big vehicles. You can be a bully with a fire truck. That's tacky. We shouldn't do that. Bad customer relations when you hit them with your vehicle. Give that man his mic. He's a man on a mission there.
Chief, in addition to the hotel business that you had cited as providing some excellent examples of customer service, are there any other visionaries or businesses that you look to that provide excellent examples of customer service that you're impressed by?
Yeah. Locally, I'm trying to think. In where I live, there's a Chevy dealership that I admire that does about as good a job as I've ever seen. And an enormously successful dealership. They've sold my wife, I think, 6 Suburbans. And if you watch the way they do business, incredible. I had, in November, I had my left knee replaced. Let me tell you a little story. This is a good question. I went to a hospital that I have been very familiar with in EMS and just through the years. It's an inner city hospital, old beat up dog of a hospital. It has the best staff on the planet. And I got my left knee replaced. And the hospital it's not fallen down, but the only reason is the termites are holding hands. And you couldn't have got better care, though. Very experienced nursing staff, which is the strength of this hospital. Terrific. I was in the hospital 3 days, no big deal, so on. In November, I got my right knee replaced. I can't get in this hospital because it's full. So my doctor says, well, we can go to this new hospital in Scottsdale. I didn't even know there was such a place. Thompson Peak Hospital. This hospital looks like one of these 5-star resorts. It really does. It's architectural. It's out in the desert. It's in a beautiful setting in the desert. You can see saguaro cactus and mountains, and it looks like the Chamber of Commerce there. Brand new building, private rooms. They give you a menu every day. You get to call in whatever chow you want, you know. The other one, the John C. Lincoln one's got an old beat up tray with Jell-O and mystery meat and all the other stuff on it. But they hook you up to machines in this new hospital. Guy does surgery on me, no sweat, push, pull, click, click. End up in this beautiful room, and they must have had 5 machines, medical machines, that you're hooked up to. And they got this young nursing staff there. And what the nursing staff did is they managed the machines. The machines all have alarms on them, you know, at the nurse's station. So as long as the machine is not alarming, what? You don't see anybody. When the machine goes off, then they come in and they look at what?
The machine.
The machine, absolutely. You're just kind of going along for the ride, the thing. Well, I didn't have any problems. I was kind of a low maintenance patient. But I'm observing all this, you know. And again, I'm not a real picky character, so, you know, and I was doing fine. And, you know, my family was coming and going and so on. But I'm thinking, you know, these people are medical electronics technicians. They're not really, there's no nursing care. I don't think, and let me say this advisedly, and please take it this way, I don't think that anyone ever touched me while I was in there. I mean, physically, you know, it was interesting. I didn't think very much about it. Month later, you got to go back to the doctor. So I go back to the doctor. The doctor says, hi, how are you? Shook hands. You know, you doing okay? Yeah, fine. He says, I got to talk to you about something. Okay, what? He says, how was your nursing care? And I said, well, it was okay. Now, come on. So I told him the story about the machines. He said, well, it's 5 for 5. He said, I did 5 knees that day. You were the 5th knee I did. And he said, it's the greatest hospital in town to operate in because they have it so, they've created this really efficient operating room so you can actually do more surgery. It doesn't take as long to do surgery in this hospital. He says, so us surgeons, we love it because we like to do surgery. We're surgeons. That's what we do. We're knee cutters. Okay, I mean, that's what you want, the thing. But he said, that day, I did 5 knees, and you're the 5th one who described the nursing care. And he said, you described it in a lot nicer terms than the other 4 did. But he said, get this. He said, I had 10 knees scheduled for that hospital, and I moved them to the old hospital. Had them scheduled. So that hospital, just with this one surgeon, lost 10 knees. What's a knee surgery worth to a hospital? Do the math. He said the hospital administrator has been in my office 14 times in the last 12 minutes. as you can imagine. I mean, that's a big deal. And he's just one surgeon in the process. So there's kind of a personal case of the difference between a humanistic older facility and an architectural wonder where you're really just sort of hooked up to the machines that they pay attention to. And I guess I wonder about that too in our business, because we're becoming a lot more, in every way, just like every business is, a lot more electronic. We're getting a lot more technical and so on. But there's no substitute for just simply a human coming in and asking you, how are you feeling? I don't think anybody ever asked me how I was feeling. I was feeling okay. I mean, I don't even mean it as a complaint, but, you know. So that hospital was, and I know the guy because we did a lot of EMS stuff. It's a level 1 trauma center, so we're in it a lot in that facility. And I know the guy that runs the thing, just a terrific manager guy, has great relations with the people who work in this hospital. If you look at, they run hospitals a lot like car dealerships on Gallup type J.D. Powers surveys. In other words, when you get that survey, boy, I mean, that's a big deal to them. And they say that in that market that this guy's hospital probably gets the highest ratings in the thing. The medics who work out of that hospital love it, and so they have a great relationship with the ER nursing staff, which is a big deal, as you all know. So you see examples of that. There's a couple of restaurants in Phoenix that are old-time restaurants where you have the proprietor is on premises, as they say, that I think are models of the hospitality, sort of the food service hospitality part of the thing. I'm going to a rehab center that's a A+ on customer service. They got old soldier rehab physical therapists. Terrific service, very progressive in the way they take you through a rehab and the thing. There's probably 8 or 10 therapists in this facility, big facility physically. Any one of them knows where you are and what you're doing, and will help you at the time. I mean, so you see, the guys that run it are just terrific. In fact, they ran the rehab in our wellness center, so I kind of know them. So you see a lot of organizations that get it, and I mean, they're good models, and you can learn a gazillion from them, you know. Yeah. But that's a good question too, is to say, and for us, I think we ought to look for that. We ought to say where are, and somebody said it here. You said it, is that we ought to learn from everybody. I mean. There's an ice cream store in Phoenix. Fat guy loves ice cream. You know, ice cream can't be bad for you. I don't give a shit what they say. This place has been there for 100 years. And you see these little local places, and you see the way they run them. And it's a family kind of deal, but there's a lot of kids that work for them. And I see them fairly often. And there's a place when you watch the way they run it and the way they market it and the way they produce the products, and now that's a more product, you know, they have a product that is pretty discernible, you know, and edible, if you may. But no, on the road, you know, I travel a lot, so you see that. In other words, you're not familiar with the place, but you get surprised both ways, but mostly positive. Honestly, I don't get a lot of bad service there. Once in a while, some junk, but you know, you see places, eat in a diner. And you can look at the menu and you can see somebody loves this place for the way they cook and that sort of thing. I don't know. It's a good question, though. I think we ought to pay attention to that, the examples of it, because, like you said, we can learn from everybody. We need to. We need to keep ourselves trainable. To say that it's a challenge, and it's our challenge to say that I ought to be able to take an ice cream store and have an ice cream cone and stand in there 20 minutes, and I can get 3 ideas as far as the fire department is concerned. I mean, and I put them on my Palm Pilot and so on, you know. I was writing things down all the time. I mean, if you're a student, you're learning this stuff. So, stay a student. You only got to go to school now about another 45 years, and you'll be just fine. So that's why we hired you so young. Welcome to the service. Boss, we're probably at quitting time here, aren't we? I'll stay here all night with you if you want, but are the troops out there in America? They got to be eating here pretty soon, don't they? I can't compete with dinner. Thank you all very much. It's been fun being with you. Thank you guys.